Hello once again. We'll try that again because apparently there was a little delay in getting the stream started. This is Kesdrith, and I'm going to be going over some more points about the Hero System RPG. I will note that I use 5th edition rules, so most of what I'm saying will apply to 5th edition, possibly 4th. I don't know how well they apply to 6th edition, which is the current edition that's out. I don't have the books for that, and I don't play with it, so I don't know. But I'm trying to take some of the sting out by giving you some heads up, some looks at some of the ins and outs of playing with this wonderful RPG system that is Hero or Champions, as some people know it. In fact, I will use the terms interchangeably. I've caught myself a few times on a few of these videos, but Hero System and Champions are pretty much, we're talking about the same thing, even though the terms are not synonymous. Alright, that said, today's episode is going to be about the difference between active points, real points, and damage class. These are three different ways of referring to the cost in character points or the effectiveness of various powers. I did not mean to do that. So, here we go. Gotta get everything clicked right? Alright. So, first off, we're going to start with active points. Active points are essentially just a measure of how potent a power or ability is. It is a good way of saying, if two things have comparable active points, they're probably in the same neighborhood as far as level of power or ability. So this is just a means of doing that. The active points are calculated by taking the base cost of the power, whichever power you're talking about or ability, and then you multiply by 1 plus the total of the advantages that are put on it. Advantages in this system, advantages on powers are rated usually as either 1/4, 1/2, 3/4, 1, and usually with a plus sign in front of them. But there's no smaller advantage than a 1/4, and they all follow 1/4, 1/2, 3/4, 1, 1/4, 1 and a quarter, and so forth. So as an example, the base cost for an energy blast power is 5 character points per 1 die 6. Alright, so the base cost for 8d6 energy blast is therefore going to be 8, the number of dice, times 5 character points per die, so 40 character points. That's the base cost. Okay, so up there in our formula, base cost, right? This is it. Let's say we're going to add 0 endurance, which is a plus 1/2 advantage. Like I said, advantages are usually indicated by a plus and the level of advantage. Limitations are usually represented as a minus and the level of limitation. It has nothing to do with a mathematical plus or minus. Keep that in mind. Alright, and we're also going to add double knockback, which is another advantage. It doubles the amount that the target struck by it is blown backwards. So this is, say, some kind of water blast. It lashes out. It really packs a lot of momentum into it and everything. So while the blast itself may not do a whole lot, it really will knock you off your feet. So double knockback. The total of those is therefore going to be 1/2 for the 0 endurance plus 3/4 for the double knockback, which is 5/4 or 1.25. So that's the total advantages. Okay? So to figure out the active cost, we take the base 40 character points and we multiply by 1 plus the 1.25 total advantages, which is the same as 40 character points times 2.25. Or 90 character points. Whew. Alright. Yes, I know there's a little bit of math involved. This is why I make another recommendation that if you really, this isn't calculus level math or trigonometry by any means, but at the same time, if you just don't want to deal with it, there's a nice little software package out there called Hero Designer. It's 6 is the current version. And it's out there and available for you if you really want to start trying to make characters for this system. And I'll recommend it too. So, we've now determined the active cost of one power. Let's look at another power, another example. The base cost for a force field, a defensive power this time, is one character point per point of PD, physical defense, or ED, energy defense. Protects you against physical attack, a physical type attack like a punch or something like that, or an energy attack, which is like fire or electricity or something to that effect. Okay, so for a 20 PD, 20 ED, and 20 ED force field, which is a total of 40 points of PD and ED, you've got to add the two together, times the one character point per point of defense, 40 character point base cost. Pretty straightforward, same as our 8d6 energy blast. Imagine that. We're going to add on half endurance. It only takes half the energy to maintain it that it normally would instead of 0 or normal. So half endurance, which is a plus quarter, 1/4 advantage. And we're going to also add hardened, which negates the effects of armor piercing attacks, which would have the level of your defense. If you got hit by an armor piercing attack, hardening negates that, so you still get your full defense. So that's also a plus 1/4 advantage. So plus 1/4 plus 1/4 is 1/2 or 0.5. Alright, so to figure out the active cost on that power, we do 40 character points, the base cost, times 1 plus 0.5, the total of the advantages. And so that's going to be 40 times 1.5, or 60 character points. Yeah, math. We don't really like it either, but we can do it. It's not that bad. So that brings up then the topic of real points. Real points are the actual cost, the actual character point cost paid for to get the power or ability. The reason this is different is because it takes into account limitations. Limitations do not change the active cost, but they do reduce the real cost, okay? So to find the real cost, you simply take the total number of active points, which is the base cost times the total advantages plus 1, right? So you take that active cost and divide now by 1 plus the total of the limitations. Alright? Yeah. This one involves division, which is a little bit more difficult for a lot of people. Alright, so we're going to do some examples of it. Let's say on our 8d6 energy blast with 0 endurance and double knockback, that has an active cost, if you remember our example, of 90 character points. Well, we're going to put these 3 limitations on it. One is beam, which what that means is that the attack must attack at 8d6 all the time. It must attack at full power. It also cannot be spread. Normally you can spread an attack like an energy blast so that it covers more area, but for each additional game hex, 1-inch game hex is the grid that this is played on. For each additional game hex your beam covers in width, you lose 1d6. Beam says no, you can't spread it like that. It also can't be bounced and ricocheted around to do trick shots and things like that. It goes in a straight line towards this target at full power. So it's a minus 1/4 limitation. Let's face it, how many people don't use beams, energy attacks or attacks at full power to begin with? We're also going to make it an OAF, obvious accessible focus. They say the person using this, since it's a water-based attack, has to thrust forward their trident. That would be gestures, which we don't put on it, but he has to have the trident to do this attack. So that's a minus 1 limitation. And then let's say it's reduced by range. You know, water does come up in a wave, hits real hard, but it dies off fairly quickly, right? So it's reduced by range, which means it loses dice as you go further and further away from the source. And that's a minus 1/4 limitation. So our total of limitations is 1 plus 1/4 plus 1/4, or 6/4, 1.5. Okay, so to get the real cost on this power, 90 character points, the active cost, divided by 1 plus 1.5, which is just 90 divided by 2.5, are 36 character points. So to get this energy blast with these advantages and those limitations on it would cost the player 36 character points. Alright? That's the real cost. Wow. Okay. Yes, again, I know, and I'm sorry, the math gets better. Oh, that wasn't supposed to be there yet, so there's more math. We're going to do something with the force field now that we did the active points on. So our 20 PD, 20 ED force field with half endurance and hardened has an active point cost of 60 character points. We're going to put an activation roll of 12 or less on it. The 12 minus is read as 12 or less. That's a minus 3/4 limitation. And we're also going to make it a focus, an OIF, obvious inaccessible focus. The difference between accessible and inaccessible foci. An accessible foci is outside of your defenses. It's out in your hand or something where it can be grabbed real easily, real quickly. An inaccessible focus is one that's inside of your defenses. You have to be knocked unconscious or restrained in some way for it to be taken away from you. So the total of those limitations are 3/4 plus 1/2, 5/4, 1.25. And when we do the math, the mighty math, we come up with a 26.667 total character points, which rounds normally to 27 character points. And now we've got a 20 PD, 20 ED force field to protect us, but it only does so on a 12 or less, on a 3-die-6 roll of 12 or less. And it's hardened, so armor-piercing attacks are negated. Well, they're not negated, but you don't lose half of your defense. Alright. A final math note about real points. You don't have to calculate the active point cost if you don't want to. You can just go straight to the real cost. There's a reason why you might want to go to the active point cost, and we'll get into that in a minute in our further discussion. But the nice formula for figuring out what the real cost is you take your base cost and multiply it by this nice little fraction over here. Which, being the math geek that I am, being a physicist, I will point out that if the total of your advantages is the same as your total of limitations, that fraction goes to 2 over 2, or 1 over 1, the same number over itself. And so that's multiplying by 1. So the base cost is your real cost. That only happens if your total advantages equal your total limitations. Okay? That doesn't always happen. In fact, it's infrequent enough that, you need this big nasty formula. Again, though, you might want to still calculate those active points because they come in other ways. But congratulations, you're through with the math. We're not through with what we're going to do with that math, but you're now finished with new math coming up. Okay? So, keep that in mind. Hopefully we haven't lost to you. We haven't had your eyes glaze over. It's really just some simple addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. It'll really work out. You just got to practice a little bit. Alright, so now we get into damage classes, or DCs. Okay? DCs are a means of directly comparing all types of attacks. Basically, there are a plethora of attacks and attack types that are available to you in Hero's system. And we as GMs sometimes need a way of comparing them. For instance, 1d6 of Energy Blast will do roughly, which is a normal attack, will do between 1 and 6 points of stun and 0 and 2 points of body. Whereas 1d6 of Killing Attack does 1 to 30 points of stun and 1 to 6 points of body. So there's quite a bit of discrepancy there. And if we look at the common attack powers, this doesn't even get into the unusual ones like darkness and so forth. or ones that are made that way, as we'll discuss in a second. You know, you've got Dispel there that costs 3 character points per die 6 of Dispel. You've got Drains that are 10 character points per die 6. You know, Flash, 3 character points for 1 die 6. Killing attacks, both types, are 15 character points per die 6. You obviously cannot compare attacks based on the number of dice being thrown. It just cannot, it won't work. Okay, an 8 die 6 killing attack is much worse, stronger attack than an 8 die 6 energy blast. So the number of dice, the number of d6 rolls is clearly out for gauging the strength of an attack. Alright, so the general rule of thumb though is that 1 damage class is equal to 5 active points. This is the general rule of thumb. Yes, there are issues. But this tells us that 1 die 6 of Energy Blast is 1 DC, 1 damage class, and 1 die 6 of Killing Attack, which costs 15 base cost points, or 15 active points if you don't put any advantages on it. So that's 3 damage classes. So that's why that's one of the reasons why the Killing Attack was so much worse, so much more powerful. By the way, with the 15 point per die 6 powers, you can usually buy one damage class to get you a +1 on the dice roll. 2 damage classes will get you a half die, and the full 3 die 6 will get 3 damage classes will get you a full die 6. All right, so let's compare apples to apples now. Let's look at the damage done by 3 damage classes of Energy Blast versus 3 damage classes of Killing Attack. So the Energy Blast is now going to do 3 to 18 points of stun and 0 to 6 points of body. Whereas the 1 die 6 Killing Attack still does 1 to 30 points of stun and 1 to 6 points of body. So the body damage kind of evens out now, but that stun, that still doesn't look too comparable. So they still seem out of line, but let's look at the average roll. Because Killing Attacks do their stun damage by you roll another die 6, subtract 1 from it, and multiply by the total of that one die 6 that you rolled for the damage. Okay? So a 3 die 6 Energy Blast, pardon me for my coughing, a 3 die 6 Energy Blast is on average going to do about 10.5 points of stun damage and about 3 body. That is the average roll. A 1 die 6 Killing Attack, on the other hand, is going to average about 8.75 stun and 3.5 body. Now it makes more sense. They are actually fairly comparable because there's a reason we call it the average roll, because that's on the average what's going to come up. Yes, I know we all have lucky friends, or we may be lucky ourselves, but if you roll enough of these things, unless you're fudging the dice or have a loaded dice set, it's going to come out where these are the averages. These are those nice means underneath those nice bell curves that come out. Okay? So, with that in mind, this is why we compare the damage classes, and these damage classes do appear to be rather comparable to each other. This is also why in previous videos I have made the comment that if you're wanting to kill something or destroy it, to actually render it into pieces, you want to use a Killing Attack. If you want to knock it out, the target out, you want to be using a normal attack, an Energy Blast, something like an Energy Blast. And this is the reason why. On average, the same damage classes of a normal attack are going to do more stun than the Killing Attack. On average. Yes, you're going to have the weird throws where that Killing Attack just does horrendous stun. But that's not average. That's not normal. Alright. So, there we go. So, more discussion on damage classes, because what about advantages? We just did a whole thing on active points and advantages. So, what about them? Most advantages count, all advantages count towards the active points, but most of them count to damage classes. Wait a minute, all of them don't? So, well, let's look at an example of what I mean by putting an advantage on it first. So how many damage classes is 1d6 of Energy Blast with Armor Piercing, AP? AP is a half advantage, so the active cost is going to be 5 character points times 1.5, or 7.5 active points. Okay? Therefore, 1d6 of Armor Piercing Energy Blast is 1.5 damage classes, not 1. Okay? So adding 1 damage class to such an Energy Blast, not going to do a thing, but every 3 damage classes gets you 2d6. Okay, so that'll work. So what about with that 1d6 of Killing Attack? Well, again, 1d6 Killing Attack is 515 character points of base cost times the 1.5 for putting the Armor Piercing on it. That's 22.5 character points. Therefore, 1d6 of the Armor Piercing Killing Attack is 4.5 DCs. And so we see that advantages still jack up the damage classes. But there's the catch. Not all advantages should be considered when calculating damage classes. Some obvious examples of advantages that probably shouldn't be considered when you're calculating how many damage classes the attack has. Reduced endurance, delayed effect, time delay, trigger. Basically, if the advantage does not change how the damage is being applied, how the attack applies damage to its target, it probably shouldn't be considered when figuring out the damage classes. So let's look at our examples of those types of advantages. Reduced endurance is not going to change in any way how damage is applied or how damage is done to the target. It's not going to affect the range. It's not going to affect where the attack is coming from. It doesn't affect the area over which the attack is being done. None of these things. So it probably shouldn't be considered when you're doing damage classes. Same thing with delayed effect. Okay, delayed effect sets a timer, essentially. No, delayed effect sets a condition when the power goes off. Okay? Time delay is very similar. You're setting a time when it goes off and trigger an action where it goes off. So, these don't change how the damage is being done. But all that said, this is 100% your Game Master's call. 100%. Okay? Don't argue with him. Don't hem and haw. He may have reasons for it. For instance, reduced endurance, he may want to consider because that's an attack you can fire all day long, every day. You never have to worry about being too tired to use it anymore because it costs you no endurance. It fires for free. So he may consider that to be something that changes how damage is being applied because you can use it all the time, every time. The other 3 change when the power actually goes off, when it actually happens. So with that in mind, you could easily set it up where you think your target is not going to have his defenses up or something like that. So the GM may rule that those actually change how damage is being applied because they change when it goes off and therefore the preparedness of the target. So again, this part of things is 100% your GM's call. Alright? Don't be sitting there going, well, Kesselrith said. It's the same thing with the book. The book says this too. Doesn't matter. If your GM wants all the advantages counted into the damage class, all of them are counted in. Alright? So how does this part work though? Let's say they're like me. So let's look at our 8d6 EB Energy Blast with 0 endurance and double knockback. It's normally 90 active points, as we've now calculated several times. But the 0 endurance doesn't change how damage is applied. So let's recalculate the active points without the 0 endurance. So that's pretty simple and straightforward. The double knockback is plus 3/4, so 1 plus 3/4 is 1.75. And so the active points for figuring out the damage class is only 70, not 90. Okay, well that means this is a 14 damage class attack rather than the 18 that the full active points would say it was. Okay, and so why bother with all this? Why not just call it an 18 damage class attack and be over with? Well, because myself, as well as many other GMs, set both a damage class limit on starting attack powers, but we also have a total active point cost limit on attack powers, on all powers. For instance, my limits usually on superhero, 4-color superhero, are that your attack powers have a limit of 12 damage classes, but powers can go up to 90 active points. So your 8-6 energy blast here would fall within that call, but if I were including 0 endurance as part of the damage classes, it would definitely be outside. You might get the extra 2 out of me without it being considered, but don't count on it. Alright, so that's why you go to this extreme, these lengths to do this, is because your 0 endurance might keep it under your damage class limit if the GM isn't considering it, and give you those extra active points that you can tack onto it. So it's a matter of, there's often 2 different sets of limits that can be used, and you're wanting to get a gauge on how powerful the attack is. So there we go, I already went over that point. So active points give you basically a mean of comparing overall strength of any power, any ability. Okay? I mean, our 40 PD, 40 ED force field was 40 character points. And a base 8d6 energy blast was 48 character points. The 2 going up against each other are going to be comparable. Alright? And that's what active points are about. They show you that these powers are comparable to each other. Alright? DCs, on the other hand, give a means of comparing damage potential, specifically of attack powers. This is because there are ways of making powers you wouldn't normally think of and rendering them attack powers. So how do you compare them? What am I talking about? There is an advantage called usable as an attack. It's a +1 advantage. So it's going to double the cost of your power. But let's say you put by 10 inches of running and then of movement power running, and that's 10 game inches, not 10 real inches. So that's 20 meters of running, essentially. And you put usable as an attack on it. And so now you can attack somebody with that 10 inches running. Yes? That means exactly what it says. You can give somebody else 20 meters per action of your action at that, of running, that they have no control over. Do you get the idea now? They will start running and have no control over whether they do or not. You have control over it because you are the one attacking with that power. So you can run them into a brick wall. Okay? Or you can just run them off the field of battle. Okay? You can do the same thing with flight. You can buy a certain amount of flight and put usable as an attack on it, and off they go, flying away, and you can just turn it off. So how effective is this sort of thing as an attack? That becomes the question. And that's where damage classes come in. Because now I have a direct measure, no matter what type of attack it is, a direct means of saying, that's about this powerful. So, that's why we go to the trouble of figuring out these damage classes. So, to summarize everything, active points allow a means of comparing all powers, any type of power, defensive powers, offensive powers, senses, enhanced senses, just all things. Active points allow you to allow for a means of comparing any power, any ability whatsoever. It's the base cost plus any additional cost due to all advantages. So, When you start putting on advantages onto your powers, that's going to raise the active cost above the base cost. And it allows, again, comparison of any and all powers. Real cost is the cost in character points that your character will actually have to pay to get that power or ability. Okay? This is the active cost minus any cost for due to limitations. It's actually a division problem, but you go back and look at the video to find out that formula again if you need to. But real cost is what you actually end up paying after the reduction for the limitations you put on there. Okay? Well, there's the nice formula after all. Real cost is just the active points divided by 1 plus the total of the limitations. And then damage class allows for comparing the damage potential of attack powers. Any attack power. If it can be used as an attack, it is an attack power. And damage class allows you to say, these are about comparable. Okay? So, but damage class tends to only include those advantages, the additional points, only from those advantages that affect how the damage is applied. Okay? And as I mentioned in my example of running and flight, it's especially useful when considering non-standard attack powers. Powers that normally aren't attacks, but your player or you have managed to allow them to. I mean, I ain't gonna lie, I got my idea of running and flight from it because I made up a character that was all of his attacks. He had teleportation, tunneling, all these movement powers that he had bought, at least part of them, as usable as an attack. I called him the Journeyman. So anyway, that's all I've got for you today in today's video. So this comes in as one of my shorter ones. But, that goes through the ideas that you've heard me mention in previous videos, if you've watched them, of the active points, the real cost, the damage class, and so forth. And these are the terms that'll be bandied about all the time, everywhere in the game. So, they're good terms to know. You now have, even if you can't calculate them, you now have some idea of what they mean at least. And now I'm rambling around. So I'm going to shut this down and call it a night, call it a video. I hope you got something out of it. I hope you're not screaming at the screen if you're a GM of this system and don't agree with me. If you don't, by all means, leave a comment. If you are a prospective player or a new player or just somebody in general who has a question, by all means, leave a comment. I'm here trying to drum up support for this system because I think it's one of the greatest systems to RP with out there. It's not for the faint of heart, especially not at the beginning, but you get there. You just got to keep trying. And that'll be it. We'll talk to you next time. I'll probably go back to be doing builds of various things, like maybe I'll do some of what the Journeyman can do. Maybe not the full Journeyman, but anyway. Peace.